Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Data Hub and another Data Hub session. I'm Chris Willsher. I am going to spend the next half hour to 45 minutes talking a little bit about open data and hopefully enlighten you and educate you a little bit about this asset and resource that's widely available for everyone to use. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to go through a few different things. Start off by talking a little bit about what open data is, just so that we have sort of a consistent sense in terms of exactly what we're talking about when we mention open data, and ensure that everybody's kind of on the same page with regards to what it is that means. I'll also talk a little bit in this section about some stats and information about how open data is being used in Canada right now, just to give you a little bit of insight in terms of how we're doing as a country as it relates to open data. The next section I'll get into is where to find open data. There's certainly a number of different resources out there. Government tends to be the most prominent source, but there are some other opportunities to find other pieces of data that could be very valuable to you in terms of trying to build your business. And then lastly, I'll walk through a couple of different use cases of some companies that are currently using open data, talk a little bit about how they're using it, and hopefully give you a little bit of insight in terms of how you might be able to take advantage of this and incorporate it as part of your business. So really the goal is to try and provide you with some inspiration around open data and how you can think about using it, and also give you a little bit of insight in terms of starting that journey down the open data path. Just to give you a little bit of background about who I am a data growth coach and the ODAK project lead with the ODAK team here at the Data Hub. So the growth coaching side of it is really working with small to medium-sized companies to help provide them with insight and guidance as it relates to their data strategy. So I focus much more from a business standpoint, so looking at licensing of data, both in terms of bringing it in and also looking at providing it to other companies. I talk a little bit about data privacy and from a business perspective, things that you should be thinking about as it relates to that. On the project side, I manage a couple of different projects right now that we're working on with some companies that are trying to solve problems, and open data is either an input into that potential project or it's an outcome of the project. So have some various hands in open data. As well, I also help out the concierge team with some of the requests that come into that service as well. Prior to ODAK, I was actually at the Weather Network, and I was the director of distribution there. So my role there was really licensing data to outside companies to allow them to take weather information and incorporate it as part of their business in whatever manner they needed to add weather into their operations. All right, so let's dive into it. What is open data? Open data, I've got a definition here. It's really about having it freely accessible and very limited use in terms, or very limited restrictions in terms of how you can go about using that information. So when we talk about freely accessed, there's a couple of different ways you can think about that. The first is just very few barriers in terms of being able to actually get to the data. So if you think about open government data portals, as long as you have a computer with an internet connection, you can open your browser, navigate to the site, find a piece of open data, download it to your machine, and away you go. You're off and running. So it's very low in terms of what you actually need to be able to access that information. Access is also from another standpoint. So think about the software packages that you might need in order to open that piece of data. To give you an example, if a piece of data is available only as a Microsoft Excel file, you would need to have access to Microsoft Excel in order to be able to open and use that piece of information. Whereas if it's in a CSV format, it's accessible by many more programs than just Microsoft Excel. So you can think about open data from that standpoint as well, just in terms of what software do I need to be able to access this piece of information. In terms of the restrictions around it, open data is really sort of free to use. Whether you want to use it for business planning purposes, whether you want to incorporate it as part of a product, whether you want to mash it up with some other data and create something new out of that, it really gives you that freedom to use it in whatever way, in whatever manner you see fit in terms of helping to drive forward with whatever it is that you want to do with your business. So throw this slide up. This is actually from the Open Data Institute, which is an organization in the UK that also promotes open data in that country. And I use this, I kind of like this because it really gives a bit of a landscape in terms of where open data fits within all other types of data. And when we think about open data, don't think about it necessarily as the information that's packaged within that data set. Open data is really more about the licensing terms around that specific piece of information and what the owners decide in terms of how they want to make that information accessible to others. So if we kind of go across the spectrum, if we start on the left-hand side with closed data, if you think about employee records or sales reports that a company may have, those types of data are going to be very, very limited in terms of who has access to them. Often, even within the company, there may be limits in terms of who would be able to look and view those pieces of information. So those are very locked down, very limited in terms of the scope of who can look at them, and also in terms of how the information can actually be shared and used. As we start to move along the spectrum towards the middle, we start to see more openness in terms of the data that is licensed at this point. So the example they have on here is medical research. So if you are a researcher that is looking into a specific health condition, there may be research that's out there already that can help you in terms of deriving new insights and help drive the research project that you want to move forward. However, to be able to access that, oftentimes the people that have that research are the gatekeepers of it, and they will provide access to it, but often there will be restrictions or limitations in terms of who can get access to it and how that information can be used. So you may have to provide them with an overview in terms of what your research project is intending to do, how you're intending to actually use that data before they will give you authorization to be able to go and access that information and then utilize that as part of your project. So again, starting to open up the sharing of information a little bit more, but there's some restrictions still associated with that piece of data. We then move to sort of public access. This is where information may be publicly accessible to you and you'd be able to sort of view it. But in terms of using it or sharing it or combining it with other pieces of data, there still may be some licensing restrictions that are attached around that. So if you think of Twitter feeds, you can go and view anybody's Twitter feed openly via the internet, but in order to actually utilize that information, you would need to get a license from Twitter to be able to sort of access it and pull it into your systems and be able to use that. And then lastly, open data, which is what we're really talking about today, is just sort of free of any restrictions. The owners of this information are just making it available, and whoever wants to use it can go access it, download it, share it, do what they want with it. So like anything, open data has its benefits and it has its challenges. Obviously, one of the big benefits of open data is the fact that you do have this freedom of usage. So whatever idea that you have, if you go and find a piece of information that is open, you can pull that into your systems and begin using that right away for whatever purpose you intend to move forward with. There's also a fair bit of open data out there. If you look at Canada alone within government, there's probably in the neighborhood of 100,000 data sets across all levels of government in the country. So again, a lot of information that you can potentially dig through and find that can potentially be useful for you in terms of building out your products and services. The challenge side of it is oftentimes this information can be a little inconsistent in terms of the format or the quality. And that can sometimes cause problems if you're looking, especially when you're looking to get data updated on a regular basis. If there's holes in it, it can sometimes present challenges for you to really create a product. I'll give you an example from my Weather Network days. We had one client that came to us and said that they wanted to be able to create a product that measured precipitation over a period of time. And the closest weather observation station to them that actually collected this information did actually collect it, but there was holes in the data, so not every hour actually had information in there. So it made it very challenging to really get an accurate read in terms of the precipitation that was measured for that particular point. So one of the challenges that you need to think about. The other one is sort of frequency of updates. You may go to an open data portal, find a really great data set, but realize then that it hasn't been updated since 2016. Depending, again, on the use and how you want to actually take that information and create something with it, that could pose a potential problem for you. Lastly, as you start to get into local government, you can run into this challenge of having to deal with a number of different municipal governments to try and find all the information that you need. And obviously this can be very resource intensive as you try to scale out whatever it is that you're looking to build. The other side of it is that you may find a really great resource at one municipality, but another resource either may not provide that specific piece of data available through their open data portal, or it may be in a completely different format. So now you're dealing with the challenge of having to take two similar pieces of data, pull them into your systems, but have to sort of work with them in different ways in order to get them to work properly within your systems. None of these are necessarily insurmountable, and as I kind of go through my presentations, there are some things out there that you'll see that are trying to provide services that help kind of alleviate some of these challenges, but there's certainly things to think about as you start delving into the world of open data. So I was taking a look at the Open Data 150, and for those that aren't aware of what the Open Data 150 is, it was a project that was undertaken by ODX over the last couple of years to survey companies in Canada and understand how they use open data. So it was asking a number of questions in terms of what types of data do you use, what sources do you pull this data from, how are you actually using that information. One of the pieces of information we collected as part of this was the year that the company was founded. And one of the interesting things when I looked at it is that 80% of the companies in Canada that are actually using open data that answered the survey were founded in the year 2000 onwards. So they're all fairly recent in terms of their development. And I think that makes a lot of sense because if you think about it, a lot of these are probably smaller companies. They don't necessarily have the resources that a larger organization would. A larger organization may have the financial wherewithal to just go out and buy a data set that could potentially be tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. A smaller company doesn't necessarily have those types of resources available to it. So they're really starting to tap into open data and looking at this as a great way for them to sort of leverage some advantages and drive some innovation and drive new data-driven insights as well. And just as a point of comparison, I actually also looked at the US comparable, which is the Open Data 500. So they had a larger number of companies. They actually had about 68% of companies that were founded in the year 2000 onwards. So a little bit lower than Canada, but they have sort of a larger sample size to work with. But again, kind of reinforces the fact that it really is a lot of these smaller and more recently founded companies that are actually taking advantage of this asset. And much like in hockey, in open data, we're number 1, too. So the Open Data Barometer is actually a measurement of 30 governments around the world that have all signed on to the Open Data Charter. And it basically measures them on a number of different factors in terms of how they are doing as it relates to opening up data and generating usage of this data. It's been running for a number of years. The UK has, I think, almost every year been number 1. They've been sort of a leader in terms of the open data movement around the world. But the recent results just came out a few weeks ago, and Canada actually tied with the UK for the top spot. Which I think is a huge testament to the work that's been done in this country in terms of governments understanding what businesses need in terms of their open data requirements and working towards trying to advance the things that they're doing to make more data available. But then on the flip side, it's also private sector sort of taking advantage of this information that is being made available and you really diving into it and taking advantage of that opportunity that's being presented to them. One of the other things that actually just started this month that I'll mention is Canada is going to be co-chairing the Open Government Partnership over the course of the next year. And the Open Government Partnership, again, is a collection of governments and other civic-minded entities from around the world that is essentially trying to create plans and best practices around transparency and accountability within government. Open data is certainly an element of that. So again, it's an opportunity for us as Canadians to sort of advance that charge and continue our leadership position as it relates to open data. So now I'm going to get into this middle section and where to find it. So I've got you all excited now. You're like, oh yes, I love open data. I want to use open data. Where do I start? And I will actually just let you know, I'm going to talk about a number of different resources throughout the presentation. I do have a document that will be available for download. I think if you fill out the survey, I think that's the way it will work. You can get access to a list of these resources along with the URLs as to where you can find them so that you can go and start digging through them yourselves. So I figured somebody may ask me that question as I go through, so we are prepared for that. So in Canada, beyond the federal government, there are 9 provinces and territories that have open data portals, and there's 60 municipalities that have open data portals. So there's definitely a huge volume of information that is out there in terms of data resources and things that you can tap into in terms of finding government-related open data. Just to give you a bit of a sense in terms of volumes, the federal government has about 80,000 data sets within their open data portal. When you get down to the provincial level, depending on, again, the size of the province or territory, you're looking at probably in the neighborhood of a few hundred up to maybe a couple thousand on the high end. And then when you get to the municipal level, cities the size of Toronto or Edmonton, which has actually really done quite well in terms of promoting open data, they're in the neighborhood of sort of 1,900 to 2,000 data sets. Smaller municipalities, you may have a couple of dozen data sets. So it kind of varies from your jurisdiction to jurisdiction and territory to territory, but there's certainly a lot of potential opportunity in the country to find data that could be useful for you. So when you're thinking about looking at open government data, one of the things that we do from a concierge perspective is think about what's the problem, like the company that has approached us and said, I'm looking for this type of data. The first thing we do is we think about, okay, well, what level of government would this data actually reside in? And that's a great way to sort of approach it as a starting point. So if you look at it, I'm looking for demographics information. Think about the potential sources in government that may have that. The census would probably be a really good source for that type of information. That's at the federal government level. So that would direct you to the federal portal as a starting point to start looking for open data sources that would have demographics. If you're looking for vehicle registration, that's all done at a provincial level. So again, that would point you to the provincial open data portals as a starting point to think about and to start finding that, that information that you can use. So again, think about the problem, think about the data you're looking for, and then sort of try and marry that back to a level of government as a starting point for you to think about where that might actually reside. And then a few more sort of thoughts and insights from our experience in the data concierge. When you actually get to the portal and you're looking to search for it, think very clearly in terms of the terms that you want to search for. The search engines in a lot of these portals are good, but they're not quite as nuanced as Google would be. So they don't necessarily have that level of intelligence to say, this person's looking for this. I think this is kind of the information that they would really need. So being very specific and thoughtful in terms of what it is you're looking for is definitely important. The other thing I would mention is also think about related terms. So if you are looking, as an example, looking for jobs information, you may want to think about searching on labor. You may want to think about searching on occupation, and look for other similar terms, because sometimes government may just label things a little bit differently. So if you go in, just search for jobs information, go, I didn't find anything. But if you enter labor and search on that term, you may potentially find something that could be incredibly useful for you. So definitely something to think about. The last one is to think about checking at various levels of government. I know on my last slide I said think about where that might reside. However, there are certain aspects of government where it crosses jurisdictions. So again, to give you an example, agriculture. The federal government has a ton of agricultural data available on their site, and that might be sort of your starting point to go to in terms of looking for open data. However, if you go to the provincial government open data portal, they actually have a bunch of information there that is very crop specific. So they may have some additional information that you can kind of layer on top of the other information that you're getting from another level of government that can provide even deeper and richer insights to you. So again, keep that in mind as you're thinking about searching for open data and looking for open data, that you may want to sort of expand your search to other levels of government as well. One of the other things that many governments are starting to do, federal level does it, I think most of the provincial levels do it, they're actually also releasing data inventories on their open data portals. What a data inventory is essentially just a catalog of all the data that they're collecting as part of their normal operations. It doesn't necessarily mean that all this data is either already open or scheduled to be released as open. It just means that it's information that they have. It can be useful, so if you've tried searching through a portal, you haven't been able to find anything, this can be another resource to kind of tap into, especially if you have a good sense that the government is probably collecting something along the lines of this piece of information, is to dig through the data inventory and see if there's something that matches up with that. And if you do find something and it's not currently open, most of these portals have a mechanism to actually contact them as well. So you can submit a request to them to say, hey, I know you're collecting this information. Is this something that you would be willing to make openly available? And just one little thing that I would suggest if you do go down that route is make sure you give them some reasons as to why you're looking to access that data, because oftentimes that just helps them understand what it is that you're intending to do, and they may go, you know what, that would actually be really great if we were able to get that, and it may help them just sort of make the case for opening it on their side. So one of the other things to think about as it relates to government is government-related entities. So there's crown corporations, there's other regulators and other entities that are maybe an arm's length from government. They often make open data available as well. And sometimes it's included as part of the open government portal. Sometimes it isn't. So always good to think about the things that you're looking for and think if there are sort of government-related entities that you could potentially go and search. It can be a little advantageous, especially if you're looking for financial data and you think, oh, Bank of Canada might have something. Going to the Bank of Canada's open data portal, you'll be searching through hundreds of data sets as opposed to the federal government one where we'll be searching through tens of thousands. So you're probably much more likely to potentially find something within the Bank of Canada's site than you would be the open government portal if it was actually there as well. And there is certainly a lot of really interesting information that's available through a number of these organizations. The Alberta Energy Regulator actually makes pipeline and well information available that are in operation in that province. The IESO, which is the Independent Electricity System Operator, I think I got that right, in Ontario, actually has a lot of hydro information. So generation, pricing, demand. So if you're looking to build something around the hydro industry or you're working in a sector that has high demand on hydro resources, there could be some really great information there that can help you derive some insights or help in terms of enhancing your product. So definitely another thing to think about as it relates to finding data sources. So while open government data is probably the most predominant form of open data that there is, there are a number of other entities that also release data and make it openly available. So I'm going to go through a couple of these areas now and give you some additional thoughts and insight. Nonprofits and academic organizations It's a little bit hit and miss, so it can be a little bit searching for a needle in a haystack, but there are a number of them that actually do make data available openly. So you can go to the site, and oftentimes it's sort of a trial and error of, well, I think this organization kind of works in that space, so go and try their site, see if you can find an open data portal within their site, and if you do, then great, you can kind of start digging into that. A couple of the examples that I have here, CANLI is the Canadian Legal Information Institute, and it was actually a nonprofit organization that was started by law societies in Canada with a mandate to collect and make available case law in Canada. So they have like millions of cases that have been tried in the country as a resource that's openly available. So if you have any need to access sort of legal information, definitely an awesome resource to be able to go and tap into and find some interesting information. The Canadian Institute of Health Information makes a lot of data available around hospitalization statistics, hospital wait times, organ transplant wait lists in terms of numbers. So again, if you're in the health space, that's certainly one to look into. And then I've included the University of California. They actually have a data set or a bunch of data sets for machine learning purposes. So if you're developing something around machine learning or AI, they may have some information that could be useful for you in terms of helping to progress that forward. Aggregators and marketplaces are something that's really starting to become a little more prominent. And what these organizations are really trying to do is solve that problem of having to go and search through multiple different open data portals and go and find it and clean the information. So there's a bunch of them that are currently in place right now. Numera is actually run by a company in Toronto called Think DataWorks, and they were actually here a couple of weeks ago talking a little bit about their product and what it is that they do. They essentially are out there collecting as many data sources as they can, data sets they can. They're working to sort of clean those up, normalize them, and then make them available via an API in their service. So they're doing a lot of that heavy lifting and a lot of that work in terms of making it easier to access a lot of this information. And they have, I think, about 250,000 data sets right now, and they do have a combination of both open data and licensed data, because they also do work with companies to help them in terms of unlocking data that they have available. Esri also has an open data sort of aggregation portal, and they, again, have about 100,000 data sets that they're collecting from around the world. And it covers health, education, crime, a number of different sectors. Again, it's kind of a one-stop shop to kind of go and search for open data that's potentially available and could potentially be useful for you. Another development that actually just came about a month ago is Google released their dataset search tool. And essentially, it's in a beta right now. Essentially, what they're doing is they are indexing open data portals and other data sources on the internet and providing a search engine that will allow you a one-stop ability to search across all of these. It's not very comprehensive yet. It's still a bit of a work in progress. However, it's something to certainly give a try and go and test it out, see what you're able to find. And then also keeping an eye on, because I imagine that Google will continue to kind of build and develop this and grow the sources that they're actually indexing as part of it. The last one that I'll talk about is private sector entities. And I'm going to put a bit of an asterisk on this one because some of this may not be open data as I defined early on in the presentation. There may be some limitations to it in terms of how you can use the data. But there's still some interesting resources out there that you can tap into, and depending on what it is you need to use that information for, it could be extremely useful for you in terms of helping to sort of advance your business. So Uber Movement is actually a division of Uber, and what they are doing is they're anonymizing trip data for 7 cities around North America, I believe. Toronto is actually one of them. And they're making this available for the purposes of urban planning research. So If you're looking at sort of traffic flow and traffic movement around a city, it's definitely an interesting resource to take a look at, and it could potentially be available for you to sort of conduct research. I know there's some non-commercial elements to it, so kind of taking that and reusing it and building a product out of it, I don't think would necessarily be part of their license. That being said, from a research standpoint and maybe trying to determine whether this type of product would be advantageous, it's definitely a source to look at. Twitter makes a number of APIs available to allow you to mine tweets on their platform. The free version of the API lets you go back 7 days, and then as you move up the tiers and start paying, it'll allow you to search longer back into the history. And I think at one of the tiers it allows you to basically search any tweet that was ever posted on the site ever, which would be just an enormous amount of data to dig through. But again, if you want to mine social media and look at social media to sort of understand insights on a particular topic, another potential interesting resource to tap into. The last one on this one that I'll talk about is New Scenes, and it's actually a company in the US that is centered around the autonomous vehicle space. And with New Scenes, what they've done is they've actually released driving scenes for Boston and Singapore to allow those that are interested in advancing the development and research in autonomous vehicles to be able to access this freely and be able to utilize that as part of the research. So again, if you're in that autonomous vehicle space, it's definitely an interesting resource to potentially look into and see if that's something that would be of interest or usable for the purpose that you're looking to use it for. So last section here, I'm going to get into a few different use cases in terms of how open data is being used right now and show you a couple of different companies and just kind of walk you through a little bit what they're doing and how they're actually taking advantage of open data. So Map Your Property was one of the companies that were part of our ODX Ventures program through the ODX team. And really what they've attempted to do and what they are in the midst of doing is trying to make it easier for land planners and real estate investment people to understand what a particular parcel of property, understand the landscape around that piece of property, what elements would be involved in terms of trying to build on that piece of property. This used to be a process that would take weeks. They've turned it into a process that would take minutes. So essentially what they're doing is, in the example that I've shown here, gone to the City of Toronto's open data site. They make zoning bylaw information available. So they've gone, grabbed that information, pulled that into their platform, layered that over the map in their product. So now when one of their consumers goes in, does a search on their system, they're instantly able to see what the zoning is for that particular parcel of land. And then they've also layered on a number of other data sets from hydrologic standards, environmental sensitivities. So quickly, one of their consumers, whether it be for land planning or real estate investment, can get a clear picture in terms of what this parcel of land actually, how it's been zoned, what are the potential challenges that they're going to face in terms of trying to develop it, and be able to make a quick decision as to whether that's something they want to move forward with or whether they maybe want to look at another piece of land. Skywatch, which is one of our tenant companies here at the Data Hub, has kind of taken the aggregator approach that I talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation. The approach they've taken, though, is for satellite imagery data. So when they started, one of the challenges that they faced was, there was lots of satellite information available from a number of organizations around the world, lots of value in that satellite data, but it was difficult to go and find it, access it, be able to pull it into your systems and start working with it. So that's really the approach that they've taken, is start to aggregate all of the satellite information together, clean it up, normalize it, and make it very easily accessible to companies that want to start taking advantage of satellite information. And there's certainly a lot of value to looking at satellite data. Anything that you want to sort of examine on the ground, you can really do through satellite imagery. So whether that is you determining the potential of crop yields, whether you want to see the development of land over the course of a period of time, down to, if you get really granular in terms of the level of satellite imagery, if an insurance company wanted to know how many houses in a particular neighborhood had pools, they'd probably be able to count that with satellite imagery information. So definitely a lot of opportunity there, and they've done a really great job in terms of being able to pull this information together and create it in such a way and provide it in such a way that it makes it very easy for companies to get into their service and start accessing this information. Transit is a company in Montreal, and basically what they've done is created a mobile app that allows people to get from point A to point B in the most efficient manner as possible. What they've done is they've taken information that's available from a number of municipalities. They have about 170 cities around the world that they're currently providing this service for. And a lot of these municipalities are making transit information available. So bus schedules, subway schedules, any sort of transit that's within the system, you can get those schedules. In addition, a number of municipalities are also making information available on a real-time basis. So you can say that either the next bus will be at this particular stop in 5 minutes. So they're aggregating all of this information together. They're also combining it with car share and bike share information as well to provide sort of a much wider landscape in terms of being able to navigate an urban environment. And then presenting this to their customers. So the customer can go in and say, here's my current location, here's where I want to go, and it will tell you the best route to get from that point to that point and tell you how long it'll actually take to move between those 2 points. So really aggregating this information and using that information to create a service for customers. Last one that I'll talk about is one that I know a fair bit about. The Weather Network and other weather companies like it use a lot of open data. And in fact, weather is probably the oldest form of open data that there is. It actually, in sort of the modern day, it actually goes back to the 50s and 60s when satellites were first sent up into space. A lot of this information was more atmospheric and climatological that was being collected. So what these weather companies will do is they go to Environment Canada, they go to NOAA. All of these entities make observation data available along with a number of other parameters. And so the example that I've shown here is the meteorological observation information. They will pull that information into their systems, and they actually use it in a couple of different ways. One is they will display it verbatim on their site to show consumers what the current conditions are for that particular location. So it's basically just a direct, put it right on our site. The other way that they use that information is they'll pull that into their systems, and that becomes one element that is used for generating the forecasts that you'll see on their site. So all the hourly forecasts or daily forecasts that are being generated, they'll take the meteorological observation data, they will take a number of other data parameters. That'll all go into their systems. It'll be run through the models that they have in these systems, and that will actually start spitting out the forecasts that they make available to their consumers. So with them, it's sort of a twofold way that they're actually taking advantage of that particular piece of data, using it verbatim, but then also combining it with other sources to create something completely new. So that kind of walks through my presentation for today. I did want to do a quick plug for a couple of ODAK services that can potentially help you if you are looking to get into the open data space or having some challenges in the open data space. The first one, which I think I mentioned earlier on, is our data concierge service. So if you're looking for a particular data source and you may be having some difficulty trying to find that data source, you can go to our website, fill in the contact form, tell us a little bit about what it is that you're looking for and how you're looking to use it. And our team can go and dig through the resources that we know are available, or also find other resources that might be available to see if that's a piece of data that we can uncover for you and let you know where that piece of data actually is. We're not successful in all cases. We've had some pretty interesting requests for very, very specific pieces of information that we're like, sorry, but I don't even know if that exists. But if you are looking for information, by all means, feel free to reach out to our concierge service. The other one is the growth coaching service, which I'm part of. So it's largely for sort of small and medium companies that are looking for assistance or guidance as it relates to their data. From my standpoint, it's more sort of the strategic licensing business side of data. We also have a few technical growth coaches. So if you're looking for some assistance from a data science perspective or a data architecture perspective, we do have growth coaches that specialize in those areas as well. So they can, if you're looking to get some open data and bring that into your systems, but you're not sure how best to integrate that or ensure that you're setting up your systems in a way that you can scale your product, you can reach out to our growth coaching service. Again, there's a contact form on our site. Go in and fill that form, and we'll get back to you and let you know how we might be able to help provide some advice and guidance and give you some direction for whatever it is that you might need. So that wraps it up. I think we have a bit of time for a couple of questions if anyone has any. And I will ask, there's a catch box. It's basically a fun throw around microphone. If you can please make sure you're using that when you're asking questions so that our online audience can also hear your question as well.
Thank you for a nice presentation, Chris. The open data suggestion or coaching that you have, is it only for the open data on your first graph, or also for the kind of scientific data part?
The growth coaching program?
If the business we're in kind of makes some data that not sure they belong to the open data, but they will have value scientifically, we like to control them. Can you coach us on that perspective as well? Yeah,
the growth coaching program isn't exclusive to open data. It's part of the ODX team, and I've kind of used it in the concept of open data just for the nature of the presentation. But yes, if you do have other data problems that aren't necessarily related to open data, the growth coaching program can potentially help with that as well.
Maybe I didn't pay attention. Are all these sources available in comma-separated format, CSV, or you need some tools to convert from their proprietary format to CSV?
It's a bit of it depends. With open data, it's all largely what that entity decided to release that, in what format they decided to release that particular piece of data in. When you go to the government portals, a lot of them have gotten really good at providing it in a CSV format or some other textual format that can be opened with a number of different programs. There are some, especially the GIS data, that are in shapefile that you might need some specialized software to be able to open and use. But again, it kind of depends on the specific data set that you're looking at. You will still find some data sets that may get released as an Excel spreadsheet. That's been slowly changing. We haven't gotten totally to this completely de-standardized format with regards to open data. So as I said, pretty good, and most of the data that you find should be in a format that you won't necessarily need to convert it from one file format to another in order to be able to start using it. But it'll kind of depend as you start digging into it to see what's available for your specific purpose. Any other questions?
Do you find the best way to figure out how often things are updated is just looking at the past of like how frequently they're updated? I'm trying to figure out how do you realize that something is real time?
Sometimes they will, like, when they make the data available, sometimes they will actually tell you
Okay.
how frequently it's updated, sometimes. The other way to do it is just, like, if you need something that's real time, is to just kind of continuously look at it and continuously update it over the course of, a few hours, just to see what the update frequency is. Some data, like the weather information, for example, like the meteorological data, they actually have APIs that are available, so you can instantly sort of grab and pull that down. And with some real-time data, they've started going to that method. Again, with government, they haven't gone too far down that road of doing APIs, but again, they're getting better at releasing it as an API or some sort of format that makes it much easier to be able to access it on a regular basis, as opposed to having to go to a specific page and download a CSV file. But again, in some cases, they will sort of say this is updated on a regular basis or updated on an hourly basis within the documentation that they provide. Or it may just be a matter of you kind of looking at it. And in some cases, you can go and take a look at the file and see how frequently it may have been updated, because there may be past history in there as well. So.
Hi there.
Hello?
The data of the Ontario Land Registry is a public data and publicly accessible, but it's held by a private company in a contract that we can't get access to it in the context of what has been brought to the OPP in regard to syndicate private placement that has duped thousands of Malaysians and Singaporean and others. And we're hoping to get cooperation from the company, and we're just wondering if a company like ODX would approach a company like Terranet and ask for data, structured and presentable for the OPP.
Yeah, I mean, with the concierge service, one of the things that we can do, which I don't think I mentioned, is if you are looking for data and it isn't currently unlocked, we can sometimes use our channels to be able to maybe help unlock it. Again, we're not always successful. Sometimes there's a reason beyond our control that it just can't be made openly. I don't know specifically about that particular, like the land registry data. I don't know enough about it, but certainly if I learn a little bit more from you in terms of what you're looking to do, there might be a channel that we can go through to see if there's a way that we can somehow get that opened up.
Okay, that'd be great, because we have a channel with the OPP, and they understand that there has been some crimes done in value fraud on agricultural land, and this is what has affected everybody's taxes under the MPAC registration and calculation system.
Right.
So, anyhow, thank you for that. I'll be in touch.
Okay. Yeah, there's one right behind you there.
Thanks. I work for Just Fix It. My name is Alex, and we're a cloud provider, and we work with some consulting about companies who are thinking about getting into open data.
Okay.
So you mentioned about one of the checkpoints would be to go through the licenses, just to work out whether the license requirements for any of the aggregators are compatible with the way that you want to use the data.
Yes.
Is there any other risks that you've seen, for example, with privacy, where someone says they've anonymized the data, but then it turns out there's a problem, they've clawed it back, or anything like that where you are relying on something that is a little outside your control?
That is a potential risk. And it's one of those things that it's really up to the company in terms of what they want to make available. So yes, there could be an issue where all of a sudden they realize, we didn't do our due diligence and there is some privacy, we need to pull this back. You also run the risk where the company may just decide, we don't want to offer the service anymore, and they just send you a notice and say, 3 months from now, we're going to kill this service. So it is a bit of a risk, especially when you're dealing with private organizations that don't have that same mandate that government does to open up data. But it's one of those risks that you kind of have to evaluate and decide, how reliant am I going to be on this piece of information? And if it goes away, will I still be able to operate my business and run my business, or is it going to completely kill me? We've seen it actually a number of times. A number of organizations have opened up APIs, especially if you look at a lot of social media sites where they've said, oh yeah, here's all these APIs, you can build on them, you can develop on them, and then all of a sudden they've decided, no, we don't want to do this anymore for various reasons, and they've shut it down, and there's businesses that essentially set themselves up reliant on this information, and they just completely crashed because of it. Anything else? Oh, there's one up here.
Hi. Yeah, I think I'm one of the unsuccessful cases in terms of not being able to get the data that I wanted through ODAK. And I think, so it's kind of a comment and a question, but one of the issues comes up with government is that if they don't necessarily understand why or what you want to use the data for, they're more reluctant to release it. But so I guess I'm finding I have to educate the government individual or that agency quite a lot. So I'm wondering if you guys are going to be moving more into a space of, I guess, helping to almost lobby or advocate or educate the opening and how, for example, to do that, like particularly around some of those, say, police data is a good one, on how do they anonymize that data to make it open?
Right.
Because that's one of the barriers, I guess, I keep running into.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, there certainly are, for particular pieces of information, there are certainly barriers, and there are, because there are some potential privacy risks around it, government does tend to be a little bit cautious with certain pieces of information. We've certainly done over the last sort of 3 odd years that ODX has been running, we've certainly done a lot of work to, kind of educate government in terms of what private sector is looking for and trying to help them understand the value by unlocking this data. So we're doing our part in terms of trying to kind of move the needle a little bit in getting them to open data, and I think we have been successful in certain instances. Unfortunately, as many successes as we had, we've also had a number of instances where they're like, no, we won't open this data. So, I think it's just kind of continued education, continually working with them to sort of help them understand the potential value that can be unlocked. And from their standpoint as well, it's the specific government entity having the resources to be able to get that data set to a place where it can actually be released, where personally identifiable information may be stripped out of it, so that they decrease that risk of potentially having data out there that's going to put citizens at risk. So
is there, because the other follow-up question to that, is there a way, if you can anonymize the data for them, is there a way to kind of enter into an agreement where you take that step for them in order to get access to the data, and you've signed certain terms and conditions?
Yeah, unfortunately, ODX as an entity, that's not really the space that, we don't actually work with the data ourselves.
Oh, I mean me as a private company.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's always a discussion that could be had, and I don't know whether you've attempted to have these types of discussions, but whether they'd be willing to or not, I can't necessarily answer that question. It would be up to the specific entity themselves in terms of deciding whether that's something they would want to do. But yeah, I mean, it's always worth asking that question and seeing if there's a way that you can somehow strike some sort of a direct partnership where you're essentially licensing that information from them under certain conditions. So it wouldn't necessarily be open per se, but there's certain conditions that you're tied to be able to access it. So. It's worth asking the question at least and seeing if it's something they'd be open to discussing.
Right, okay, thanks.
Oh, one back there.
Thanks a lot. As you work with multiple organizations, what are the major challenges that you see in private businesses on adopting the open data, on getting, extracting the value out of this?
So the challenges that we've seen in terms of organizations getting into open data?
Yeah.
Good question. I mean, I think, obviously from the concierge service, it's a matter of finding the right open data sets. It's just interesting because one of the questions we ask in our concierge service is, have you tried looking for this open data? And I don't know the exact percentage, but a large percentage of people have said, yes, I've tried looking for it and I haven't been able to find it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing is because, as I kind of went through my presentation, there's a lot of different potential sources where you can find this information. So it's that knowledge of knowing where to start and how to start looking for it. That's probably been the biggest thing that I've seen in terms of companies getting started. And I'm assuming there's probably a level of frustration. I mean, there's probably a lot of companies out there that have tried to use open data, haven't found anything, didn't know that we existed, and kind of went, I can't find it, I'm just going to give up. So I'm assuming there's probably a level of frustration out there as well in terms of actually tapping into it. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I've seen is just being able to identify sources of information. Unfortunately, we've been able to help a number of companies sort of direct them to a specific source of where that information resides. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming. My contact information is there. Feel free to reach out if you have any further questions.